Why should you care about your credentials being stolen? How can you reduce the chances of them being stolen? And what exactly happens if they are? And what is the dark web? Answers to all those questions and more coming up next. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Kim Gerhart, the Chief Sales Officer at OneIT. If today's video content seems interesting to you, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and go ahead and scan the QR code coming up. That is a link to our LinkedIn page, and you can stay up to date with all of the news and stories going on at OneIT, and just it's a great way to connect with us overall. So the topic for today's video is all wrapped up around credentials being stolen, what happens to them, and really why you should care about all of that. But we get so many questions about what is the dark web and what happens if my credentials are stolen. So we're going to talk about all of that and more today. So I'll start off with why you should care if your credentials are stolen. And really, the answer to that revolves around the information that's available to someone taking your credentials. So if someone just has your name and email address, it's probably not that big of a deal. I mean, of course, you don't want anyone taking anything from you, but it really involves what kind of information is stolen by having your credentials. So if someone has your name and email address and your email's password, and you reuse that password, say on your bank account, they could then have access to your bank account. If they have access to that, they can gain other information and impersonate you. Sometimes records are stolen and your social security number might be involved. So they could have your name, your phone number, your address, your social security number. They might have a password. Those are called PII hits, personal identifiable information. So the more PII they have on you, the more critical it becomes. So really it's about protecting yourself, protecting your credit report and credit score, protecting your bank account, and then just overall protecting your credentials from being stolen, where a multitude of things can happen. And we'll talk more about that later. But there are three ways that credentials are harvested or obtained. Those are through phishing, where someone sends you an email and maybe you've clicked on a form or opened an attachment and filled something out. But phishing is probably the number one way credentials are stolen. Keylogging is next, where someone accesses your device from a common network and can see what keystrokes you're hitting and when. So keyloggers, phishing, and then a data breach. Well, what happens to that information after someone has it? Well, maybe they use it themselves if they're harvesting and then also using your credentials, if they're that type of hacker, or maybe they put them up for sale on the dark web. The uses are the same. So we're going to talk about what the dark web is a little bit and then how they're used. So the internet really has three layers. There's the surface layer that you see every day when you're browsing the internet and you're accessing YouTube, any of your entertainment platforms. Just the regular access to the internet is called the surface layer of the internet. If you go down one layer, that's called the deep layer of the internet. And that's where websites are that are storing your information. So your login information and your credentials and things like that. And it's probably the biggest part of the internet. There's so much more that is available there, but it's not accessible by you or me. I mean, it could be, but it's not a place that you're going to go or will be a topic of conversation for this video. But if you keep going down a layer, you will get to the dark web. And that is where criminals reside. There's also a lot that goes on in the dark web that is also good. There's some humanitarian benefit to the dark web, particularly during times of unrest or in countries of unrest. But for the most part, the dark web is where people communicate regarding illegal activity, and we are not going to talk about all of that in today's video either. That's something if you want to know about, you can investigate, but for the sake of business, doesn't really have a place in our conversation today. You don't want to visit the dark web. Once you get in, you can't get out. I mean, it's really hard to get out. You've been there, your footprint's there, so it's best to just leave that alone. But if your credentials appear for sale there, or even for free, there's a dollar value on them. So it's cheap, right? So someone can go out and buy your personal information. That includes your name, your address, your phone number, your social security number, maybe your medical records, maybe information on your mortgage. It just depends on what was hacked or phished, and that's what's available. So a lot of people think back to a long time ago when people were just sending out disruptive emails and, oh, I was hacked, and now on Facebook, 100 people got a friend request from me, and this just really no big deal. That's not what goes on with your credentials when they're purchased on the dark web and used by hackers. It's actually a human being going in and looking at those credentials and going through them, trying to find a way to impersonate you or to access your accounts to their benefit. It's not a robot. It's not an organization. It's a person sitting in their house going to great effort to breach your information or your money, or just you in general, so they can go get a credit card or take on your identity for other reasons. So it is kind of scary, and you really should care. And it's just important to understand that once someone has purchased your credentials, they're going to try their best to use them to monetize them to their benefit. Next logical question is, how do I prevent that from happening to me? Well, there's some really easy habits you can get into, and some software you can use that's inexpensive or even free that will protect you from a lot of this. So the most important thing is not reusing passwords. So if you log into your email with a password that is like your email address, a lot of people use that same username for a login to their bank. It's easy to remember. And then a lot of times your passwords are the same too. Some people just keep a password for 27 or 30 logins, like your Netflix, your Facebook, your email, some of the software you use for work. Absolutely never reuse a password between applications. And then changing them regularly isn't a bad idea, but it's becoming less important as we move forward, particularly in regard to my next tip, which is setting all of your software and your login access up with two-factor authentication. A lot of websites and a lot of applications force you to do that, or strongly suggest it. Absolutely do that. So that way, if someone does get your username and password, they don't have that third level of authentication required to get into your account. It makes it much more difficult for someone, and they would just move on, maybe to someone else's credentials they purchased that would be easier to hack. The door on your house is locked, so they're moving on, right? It's that simple. You can think about it that way in the digital world. One other tip that isn't really about securing your passwords or information, but is just good advice in general, is regularly running a credit report with at least one of the credit agencies every year to make sure that everything in your name was actually opened by you. All of the accounts are yours and they weren't fabricated by someone else. I'll talk to you guys a little bit about some experience OneIT has as an MSP and what we see out in the market. There's two things that come to mind that just really surprised me the first time I saw them, and I think it's interesting for everyone else as well. Hackers get paid well, right? So if they can breach your account, use your identity, get into your bank account, somehow talk someone into transferring your funds into their account, that's lucrative, right? For not a lot of work. They have a process down, works really well for them. They can make a lot of money in an hour. So remember that when you're thinking about securing your information, your usernames and passwords, and setting up your 2FA. You absolutely want to do that. This is not just something that people aren't interested in. Cyber criminals are very interested in this because they can make a lot of money quick if you have weak security. We had a business call us one day. They were not one of our clients, but they had their data held for ransom. So a hacker came in through one of their users and took their entire network hostage, held it for ransom, and then was chatting with them about having access to their data, and they wanted paid in cryptocurrency. And this particular organization contacted us. It was local, and they wanted assistance with this. And we actually got the hacker on the phone. And it was a person. It was, sounded like a younger man. And at one point he asked, he's like, hey, can you guys hold on for about 10 minutes? I'm hungry. I want to go to Subway and grab some dinner. And it was in that moment where I realized, oh my gosh, this is a person. This is a person's job. They're earning a living. This is how, they're paying their mortgage and putting food on their table. And it was really interesting, like in that moment, to understand what was going on. This client did not have a data backup, which is something we'll talk about in future videos, just how important that is and backing up to recover. But they did get paid. So the client paid us. We used cryptocurrency to free their data. And at the end of the call, he asked us if we would leave him a good review. Like if he sent us a link, if we would leave him a good review, because that way, when he held other businesses or individuals' data for a ransom, they would know they would get it back if they paid him. So actually a criminal looking for a good review to ensure future revenue streams. So, it's definitely people doing this, so be aware of that. Another example we have is of someone impersonating human resources at one of our clients, saying that their banking information had changed. This was actually a person, so they had purchased credentials. They knew the director of human resources name. They lifted it off the website. They impersonated her via email and sent an email out to every employee on their letterhead with a form that said, just fill in your banking information and routing number and email it back to me. And there was one character off in that email and no one noticed it. A lot of people sent their information in. So the next payroll that ran, the people who had completed that form, their checks were diverted into a different account. The bank had not changed. And human resources and the organization did not know until it was too late, until after the payroll ran and people didn't get paid. It was that authentic, and it was in the size of an organization where people really weren't talking about it. They just went ahead and did it. Things like that happened a lot. So 2 examples for you to think about and the importance of securing your information. Of course, if you have any questions about this, you can always reach out to OneIT. We have training programs on this for individuals, for organizations, and a suite of products to help with multi-factor authentication and 2-factor authentication. And we're always happy to have a conversation as well. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you in the next video.